Andrew Kassoy. Andrew is the co-founder and co-chair of B Lab, the nonprofit organization behind the B Corp movement. Before starting B Lab with his two best friends, which honestly sounds like the best way to start a business, if you ask me, he spent 16 years in private equity on Wall Street. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
Please give him a round of applause.
Thanks, Martina, and thanks, everyone. I'm truly honored and a little bit intimidated to be here with a huge community of change makers. I want to speak personally for 1 second and tell you that this place has an incredible amount of meaning for me. Paris has been a very formative part of my growing up and my learning. In fact, if you can picture maybe an even shorter version of me with actually a lot more hair and a face full of pain au chocolat, that would be my 4th birthday, which was celebrated on the top of that building behind me. But probably more importantly, when I was 16, I came here on an exchange program, and I lived about 2 blocks from this building. And I left a month later with a family for life, a second set of parents, French parents. And the father in that family, a man named Roger Mathieu, who was a French Air Force officer, a soldier, has been a mentor for me for 40 years, and he still lives nearby. And he was a man who was deeply concerned, essentially, with care. Care not only for his family and his community, but for his society and for the beauty of the planet that he lived on. So why am I talking about care when we're supposed to be having a conversation about systems change and business and capitalism? Well, I'm talking about care because business as a system has come to play such a dominant role in all of our lives, and one that I think is becoming even more profound with financialized capital markets and social media and now artificial intelligence. And that business system was created not with a duty of care, but a duty of carelessness. Carelessness for people, carelessness for communities, carelessness for the planet. You all know that. That's why you're here. But I had to learn it maybe in a harder way. I spent the first part of my career as a private equity investor on Wall Street. I was in awe, and I still am, of the way business can be used to attract capital and talent to scale. But I also had to learn, and I came to see that system does exactly what it was programmed to do. It creates wealth for a few, the shareholders. And if it happens to create benefit or harm for individuals or for the planet, well, that's an economic word called an externality. That's not the purpose of the system. That narrative and the rules and the norms that follow from that narrative are incredibly powerful. Now, it's easy to blame Milton Friedman, who famously said that the social responsibility of business is to maximize wealth for the shareholders or for the owners. And it's easy to say, well, this is maybe a pendulum, 50 years of dominance by an American economic model. All we need to do is nudge the pendulum back. But the fact is that model is far older, and it's been evolving and adapting really for 400 years. That's the logo of the Dutch East India Company, which 400 years ago really became the first public company. And when it became that, it had an obligation to create distributions for its shareholders. And what did it do as it grew in order to maximize those distributions? Well, it created a business model built on slavery and the appropriation of land and starting private wars, because those were the things it could do to make more money for its shareholders. So the system has had a long time to evolve. That system, arguably with the addition of technology and financialized capital markets, reached its perfection in the late 20th century with a much more explicit doctrine, the doctrine of shareholder primacy, the idea that businesses exist. The reason that they exist is to maximize wealth for their distant owners. It's ironic that in the US, where most corporations are incorporated or headquartered in the state of Delaware, the Delaware law actually has a duty of care. But that duty of care is to only one group of people, the shareholders. It's to maximize the company's value for the benefit of the shareholders. And the duty of care for a few is a duty of carelessness for the rest of us. The consequences of that system are pretty obvious, and they're entirely predictable. Business operates outside the donut, outside of human and planetary boundaries, because the rules and the norms of the system, they require it. And because the planet is on fire, people feel left out, sold out. They feel left behind. They're marginalized. And so people are on fire. They're angry. And whether their anger is manifested in activism or whether it's manifested in populism, in many ways they're really saying the same thing. The system isn't meeting my needs, and I'm upset. I don't trust the system. Now, they don't all blame it on business, not explicitly, but I think that if you pull the thread on any of the problems that we're talking about here, whether it's climate change or biodiversity or the degradation of work or the marginalization of workers throughout supply chains, any of these problems, if you just pull the thread on any of them, what you can see at the end of that thread is business, the role of business in society. In other words, we have systems failure. Business is failing to meet the needs of all of us. It is not creating a shared and durable prosperity for all. So the question is, how do we change that system? Well, I think there are two things required for systems change. The first is recognition of systems failure with the existing system. I think we can put a tick mark in that box. The second thing is that we have to believe that there's a viable alternative. We need a system that is purpose-built to meet our greatest aspirations, a system in which business exists to create value for stakeholders, not just shareholders, a system that recognizes our fundamental interdependence, a system that's built on a real duty of care. Now, when we started B-Lab, the organization that I co-founded 17 years ago, philanthropists who we needed to help us raise money told us that we needed to have a theory of change. As three business people coming from the private sector, we had no idea what that meant, and so we invented one. And I think it's turned out to withstand the test of time. In the end, what we really need is for business to have a positive impact on society and the environment. Business so dominates our economic life that if all business had a positive impact on society and the environment, we would be in a very different place than we are now. And many of you are entrepreneurs and people running businesses that are already doing that. But you represent, unfortunately, a drop in the bucket relative to the whole. And the fact is that in a system of contrary norms and contrary rules and institutions, it is very hard to expect that all businesses will exist for the benefit of stakeholders. And so, in order to drive systems change, we don't just have to change the behavior of business, we need to create the ecosystem, the market infrastructure for that system to function in a different way. We have to change the culture of business so that all of us have the expectation, whether we're consumers or investors or people working at companies, that we drive the expectation that business will behave for the benefit of stakeholders. We also have to change the structure of the economy, meaning we need to change the rules of the game. If public policy says that the objectives of a business need to be to maximize value for their shareholders, then that's what businesses will do. If the rules say something different, like the purpose of business and therefore your obligations are to create value for all stakeholders, then that will be possible. When we started to build the B Corp movement 17 years ago, that was the idea that we had in mind. We started by creating a certification because we wanted to show in a common way, an easily understandable way, that there were thousands and thousands of businesses that were succeeding because they were meeting high standards of social and environmental performance, of public transparency, and of legal accountability. And I think that's working. Today, there are well over 8,000 certified B corporations. They're in over 90 countries around the world. Over 250,000 companies use their standards in order to measure and manage and improve their impact. And I'll just say a quick shout out to the 400 certified B corporations right here in France. Yes, give yourself a hand. But the objective was never to build an empire of certified B corporations. The objective was to build a community of leaders. And in building a community of leaders, that they could work together collectively as part of a larger stakeholder capitalism movement to change the narrative about the purpose of business, and then to exercise their collective power. And I know in our community sometimes the word power is kind of a bad word, but I think it's critical that these businesses come together to exercise their collective power to demand change to the rules of the game, to demand that someday all businesses behave like B Corps. Now, that movement, I think, and the larger stakeholder capitalism movement is inspiring to many people. And for many years, as we were starting to build it, many people in the mainstream found it charming or cute. If you were a B Corp and you told somebody who didn't know about it, they might kind of pat you on the head and say, that's really nice, congratulations. But as that movement has scaled, and as more people know about it, it's become a threat. It's threatening, and there's a backlash. And the reason for that is existing systems, incumbent power, don't just give up and walk away. People are threatened by this movement of stakeholder capitalism because they know that it's what so many people want, and they know it might not work to their benefit. And so what do we see in the US? We see pushback on legislation that would stop investors from investing in companies that consider social and environmental factors. In Europe, you've had really important changes to legislation that lead to supply chain due diligence. But on the other hand, some of the most important provisions of that legislation, the CSDDD, like a duty of care, which would have been the first time ever that companies in the world would have had a duty of care to stakeholders, was removed. So there's pushback. Existing systems are powerful. And let's be honest, many individuals, including me, lose our moral courage when we are alone in the face of a backlash. But I also think that a backlash is a sign that we're winning. It's a sign that we're powerful. Martin Luther King Jr. said that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, but he also knew that it wasn't inevitable. Our job, all of us, is to weaken the mighty walls of resistance to a new system. And we have to do it with care so that we don't build a system just like the careless one that exists today. This idea of care was built into the B Corp movement from the beginning. But over the last year, I've become more familiar with it in a more intimate or a more personal way. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer. And I felt incredibly alone. I felt like I was by myself. And almost overnight, not just my family and my friends, not just my doctors and nurses, who have been amazing, came to me with care, but this entire global community in the B Corp movement. I started receiving messages every day, and it reminded me of why we were doing this in the first place, this incredible sense of care. I couldn't have gotten through last year, and I won't be able to get through what's still ahead of me without that deep community of care. I just wouldn't have the moral courage to do it alone. And so that brings me to a final, thank you. I've never talked publicly about that. That was hard. That brings me to a final image, another incredible building in this city, and a quick story about cathedral builders. The people who came here to build that building and so many others were artisans. They came with their skills and their tools, choosing to build a thing of beauty. But it took a long time to build, and in most cases, most of them knew that they would never see the finished product. It was a relay race, and they knew that. But they came anyway in an act of collective beauty to build something extraordinary. Economic systems, a little bit like buildings, are just made up of and built by people. People like all of us who have the power to change the system that we've got. And I think more than at any time in history, individuals have that power because we play so many different roles in our own individual lives, as consumers, as investors, as workers, as entrepreneurs, as members of our communities. We have the power, if we act collectively, to build the system we want. And in a time when so many people are careless and so many people lack moral courage, it's up to us to double down on care and courage. And that's a hell of a lot easier and a hell of a lot more powerful if we do it together. Thank you.